Dr. Sleep is directed by Mike Flanagan and is based off the original novel by Stephen King, and is of course a sequel to The Shining. This movie sees a grown-up Danny Torrance dealing with both literal and figurative ghosts of his past, and he tries to run away from them through violence and alcoholism, and eventually gets to a spot where he wants to be able to get better and help himself. Now, I've been excited for this movie for a while because, of course, I'm a fan, like many other people, of Stanley Kubrick's The Shining. It's one of my favorite horror films of all time. I think it's one of the best horror films of all time, and it's one of my favorite Kubricks out of all of his movies. I'm also a huge fan of Mike Flanagan and all of his work in recent years. He's not only proven himself as a capable horror director with Oculus and Gerald's Game and Hush, but he's also proven himself to be a phenomenal storyteller with The Haunting of Hill House, which is one of my favorite TV shows to come out in the last couple of years. And as many people who know me know, I am an enormous fan of Ewan McGregor. He is one of my favorite actors of all time. So putting all of these components together, you can definitely say that I was very, very highly anticipating this movie ever since it was announced. Now, as far as expectations go, I was never expecting this movie to be on the same level as The Shining. The Shining's been out for almost 40 years now, and has had time to become incredibly iconic. Even though Kubrick's adaptation of Stephen King's book was hated by Stephen King, and that in itself was the biggest concern for this movie when everybody was waiting for it to come out, and ends up becoming one of its biggest problems. This movie has to be able to please fans of the book while also satisfying die-hard Stanley Kubrick fans. So in a way, it's kind of King versus Kubrick this time around. Now, I haven't read the book, so I don't know how mad I'm supposed to be about the adaptation and how accurate or inaccurate it is, but you can tell that the movie struggles some with leaning one way or the other throughout parts of the movie, and I'll get more into that here in a second. And now, I think the strongest part of this movie is the characterization of the main characters and the villains. Not only do you understand the mindset of Danny and Abra, a young girl with an incredibly powerful capability to shine in the same way Danny does and makes a mental connection with him, you can also understand the mindset of the villains. And this is also thanks to the performances in the movie. Ewan McGregor, of course, gives a really good performance as Danny. Rebecca Ferguson is very, very good as the main villain, Rose the Hat. She's very entertaining. But one of the biggest surprises is Kylie Curran, who plays Abra. Usually with most child actors in horror movies especially, they can come off as very annoying or whiny and become a hindrance on that movie. But this time around, the kid is actually one of the best parts of the movie. She's super involved with the plot and gets it moving, too, on purpose. So she's a character that takes action. Now, I did enjoy this movie quite a bit. I really enjoyed a majority of the movie, especially the second act. This movie is a little over 2.5 hours long, so the second act takes up a very big chunk of the movie. And it spends this time helping the audience get to know these characters and be able to relate to them. Now, Mike Flanagan does a phenomenal job behind the camera. This movie is paced very, very well. It flows really well, which is a hard thing to do for a horror movie, especially that's this long. And the cinematography is amazing. There's one sequence in particular that is quite possibly my favorite scene in the movie that was simply just spectacularly creative eye candy. The camera work is incredibly creative, which Flanagan is known for doing in a lot of his work, especially with The Haunting of Hill House, but he takes it to another level with this, and I hope people are able to see that when they watch this movie. And the story is very creative when it comes to these characters, and Flanagan, once again, proves how talented of a mind he has during this movie. These are the aspects that I've really loved about this movie. However, my biggest problem with the movie is the third act of it, in particular the last 5 to 10 minutes. The third act does take place in the Overlook Hotel, which is very obviously shown in the trailers, so hopefully that isn't a spoiler. And while the atmosphere and the production design is fantastic, I do think it's a step down from the first 2 acts of the movie, from the first 2 hours. This is more than likely a personal preference, to be completely honest, but I do believe that the first 2 acts did such a good job at being their own thing while still paying small homages and making references to The Shining, that actually returning to the hotel itself kind of cheapens the climax, because a lot of this movie spends a lot of time building tension between the villains and the main characters for this fantastic confrontation that you really, really want to see. And I thought that once it gets kind of to the Overlook Hotel, it gets kind of underwhelming as a actual payoff to everything that's come before. It feels like it's trying to be more fan servicey, which I don't really have a problem with. I just think that it could have really done its own thing and still have been a sequel to The Shining without having to go back to the set of The Shining. I think that it really would have benefited from really embracing its own story and running with it. So I do think that the third act is the weakest part of the movie, just personal preference, of course. But overall, I think this movie is very, very creative from Flanagan. It's not like a lot of horror movies you see. There are things in this movie that do get under your skin and, to me, are very creepy. Because even after leaving the theater and even into the next day after seeing it, I find myself looking down a dark hallway and being creeped out because of some of the imagery in this movie. And there are some things that it really does not shy away from as far as taboo things to do in movies, which I do respect it for in being kind of a ballsy horror movie. But like I said, there are aspects that I really like about this movie, especially when it's being its own story. And I think that the second act is definitely the best part of the movie. But, of course, that third act just felt underwhelming to me and felt like it wasn't really deserved and wasn't as good of a payoff as it could have been for the rest of the movie that was building up to that. So overall, I'm going to be rating Dr. Sleep an 8.0 out of 10. And something for people to remember is that when The Shining came out, it was not very highly regarded among critics. It got good reviews, and Jack Nicholson was lauded for his performance and everything. But, I mean, Shelley Duvall was nominated for a Razzie, and even Stanley Kubrick was nominated for a Razzie for Worst Direction, which a lot of people don't talk about. But it goes to show that movies like that, especially with Kubrick in his time, of course, which a lot of people know about, I think that this is going to age in the way that The Shining did. I think it's going to get better over time. I think more people are going to like it. So tell me what you thought of it. Let me know, and I'll be back with another video.